What happens when a soft-spoken high school teacher dares to stand up against the most powerful judge in town? At first glance, Justin Bieber didn't look like someone who would stir up controversy. Clad in a simple burgundy sweater, chalk in hand, he looked every bit the passionate literature teacher his students knew and loved. For 10 years, he had taught at Westridge High, quietly instilling lessons about truth, justice, and morality through the works of Shakespeare and Steinbeck. He believed stories could shape the world, and more importantly, teach young minds how to challenge it. But on one seemingly ordinary afternoon, everything changed. That day, the bell had just rung. Students shuffled out of the classroom, some still debating the use of symbolism in To Kill a Mockingbird. Justin smiled, collecting papers and preparing for his next class. He was reaching for a copy of the school newspaper when a bold headline caught his eye. Local judges controversial. Decision redirects school funding. The article mentioned Judge Franklin Pierce, an intimidating figure known for his courtroom dominance and deeply entrenched political ties. Justin's smile faded. He remembered the town hall meeting a few weeks back where he had stood, calmly, yet firmly, questioning Judge Pierce's ruling that had diverted educational funds toward a private development project. His words had been respectful, but pointed. As someone who once studied law, Justin had laid out procedural concerns and cited relevant case law. He wasn't trying to make headlines. He was just doing what felt right. That same night, in the Yaya Teacher's Lounge, his friend Diane had nudged him with a wary look. "Heard you stirred the pot at the town meeting," she said, half joking. "I just told the truth," Justin replied. "What Pierce did may be technically legal, but it's morally wrong. That money belonged to our students." "Well," Diane said, lowering her voice, "Pierce has friends in high places. Be careful." Justin had laughed it off. After all, he was just a teacher. How much damage could he really do? But behind the mahogany doors of Judge Pierce's private chambers, the seeds of a vendetta were already being sown. The judge hadn't forgotten the young man who had made him look incompetent in front of the town council, and he wasn't about to let it slide. So when Justin received a court summons days later for a traffic violation he had already paid online weeks before, it felt off. A cold knot formed in his stomach as he remembered the judge's eyes staring, daggers at him from the back of the town hall. At the time, Justin didn't realize it, but that traffic ticket wasn't a clerical error. It was the first move in a silent war, one where reputation, livelihood, and power would all be on the line. And the man in the burgundy sweater, he was about to remind the system why you should never underestimate a teacher who knows the law. The trap. Behind the gavel. The night after receiving the suspicious court summons, Justin Bieber sat quietly in his modest apartment, the soft hum of his desk lamp illuminating papers scattered across the table. On his laptop screen blinked a payment, confirmation for the traffic ticket he had already paid, proof that this summons made no sense. He leaned back, running a hand through his hair, trying to brush away the unease settling in his chest. He remembered something his grandfather once told him. A man who had been a quiet but formidable attorney in a small town just like this one. If it feels wrong, it probably is. Trust the itch under your skin. It's telling you something's off. That itch was now screaming. Justin opened his grandfather's old briefcase, the leather worn but still sturdy. Inside were yellowed legal notepads, law textbooks filled with margin notes, and newspaper clippings from cases long closed. This had been his world once, before he walked away from a promising law career to teach literature. Back then, he believed that shaping young minds was the noblest fight of all. But tonight, it felt like the law was calling him back. Miles away, in a towering office lined with mahogany bookshelves and framed degrees, Judge Franklin Pierce was already 3 steps ahead. He sat behind a desk designed to intimidate, massive, glossy, impersonal. A crystal glass of scotch sat untouched beside him as he reviewed a manila folder labeled Justin Bieber. His expression was cold, calculating. "Gerald," he called to his clerk, who entered the room with hesitant steps. Yes, Your Honor. Bring me everything we have on this teacher, Bieber, and send a revised summons. Change the charge to failure to appear and add contempt. Gerald's eyebrows knit together. But, sir, he already paid the fine. We can't. The system allows discretion for a reason, Pierce interrupted sharply. It's not about the traffic ticket. It's about respect. That little speech he gave at the town hall. That was a direct attack on my authority. He leaned back, forming a steeple with his fingers. I've sentenced murderers with more humility. The clerk hesitated. But this could backfire. Only if someone makes it public, Pierce said with a smile. And who's going to believe a teacher over a judge? Later that evening, Judge Pierce attended a fundraising dinner with the town's elite, business owners, city officials, and the superintendent of schools, Davis. Over filet mignon and polite laughter, Pierce leaned toward Davis. Some of your staff are getting politically active, he said, swirling his wine. Davis looked up, puzzled. There's a teacher at Westridge, Pierce continued. Bieber spoke out at a town meeting. It's troubling, really. Educators stepping outside their role sends the wrong message to students. I'll look into it, Davis said quickly. He knew better than to cross the judge. The trap was now fully set. The next day, back at Westridge High, Principal Stevens asked Justin to stay after a faculty meeting. His expression was tight, his voice careful. I got a call from the superintendent, he said. Something about a legal issue involving you. Justin blinked. Legal issue? You mean the traffic ticket? I paid that weeks ago. Stevens slid a paper across the desk. There's talk of failure to appear. Contempt of court. The superintendent, said Judge Pierce himself, raised concerns about your conduct. Justin stared at the paper, then back at Stevens. This is about the town hall, isn't it? The silence said everything. Later that afternoon, Justin opened his mailbox to find a thick envelope marked official court summons. Inside were charges of contempt and failure to appear. The required court date, just 3 days away, before he'd even had a chance to understand what was going on. Hands trembling, he called the court clerk's office. I already paid this ticket, he said. The clerk replied curtly, our system shows you were flagged for irregular processing and scheduled to appear in court. When you didn't, Judge Pierce issued the citation. But I never received any notification, Justin insisted. Then you'll need to address that with the judge directly, the clerk said before hanging up. Justin stared at the phone, heart pounding. This wasn't just about a traffic ticket. It was personal. That night, he stood before the bookshelf holding his grandfather's law books. Slowly, deliberately, he pulled one down. Judicial ethics and misconduct. Dust puffed into the air. His hands no longer trembled. This wasn't fear anymore. This was focus. He spent the rest of the evening cross-legged on his floor, surrounded by open books, legal documents, and his laptop. Highlighters and pens rolled off notepads filled with dates and case numbers. He didn't just want to defend himself. He wanted to understand the full scope of what he was walking into. Patterns began to emerge. The judge had a history. One that the public hadn't pieced together because it was subtle. A journalist who wrote a critical piece about Pierce had faced an IRS audit. A defense attorney who challenged one of his rulings had been reported for misconduct. Minor infractions blown out of proportion, usually ending in dropped charges, but with reputations tarnished in the process. This wasn't about the law. This was about intimidation, and now Justin was next on the list. But unlike the others, he knew how to fight back. The turning point. The next morning, Justin walked into the teacher's lounge and found Diane waiting, holding a cup of coffee that had long since gone cold. You okay? She asked, concern etched into every line of her face. He nodded, but his eyes told another story. Stevens pulled me aside yesterday, she whispered. Asked if I'd noticed anything political in your lessons lately. Justin set his bag down slowly. They're building a case, he murmured. Not a legal one, a professional one. If they can't get me through the court, they'll try to discredit me at school. Diane's lips tightened. This is insane. No, Justin said quietly. It's calculated. That afternoon, alone in his apartment, Justin pulled a dusty box from his closet. Inside were his grandfather's case files, organized meticulously with color-coded tabs and hand-scribbled notes in the margins. He remembered helping organize them during summer breaks as a kid, never imagining they'd someday help him fight a real battle of his own. He opened his laptop and drafted 3 emails. The first was to a former law school classmate now working with the state bar. The second to Mark Chen, a former student turned investigative journalist. The third to the courthouse. He would represent himself. By evening, responses had started trickling in. Mark replied first. I'm on it. Anything for the guy who taught me how to question everything. The bar contact was more cautious, but intrigued. You're walking a thin line, but if you can prove a pattern of misconduct, this could get serious. Justin leaned back, a strange, calm settling over him. For the first time since this nightmare began, he didn't feel like prey. He felt like a litigator preparing for trial. The following day, Principal Stevens entered Justin's classroom during third period. He stood silently in the back, arms folded, scribbling in a notepad as Justin led a discussion on To Kill a Mockingbird. Justin didn't skip a beat. He quoted Atticus Finch's famous line, "But there is one way in this country in which all men are created equal. There is one human institution that makes a pauper the equal of a Rockefeller. That institution, gentlemen, is a court." Stevens's pen paused in mid-air. After class, the principal approached. "About this hearing, maybe you should just apologize. These things can escalate quickly." Justin smiled gently. "With all due respect, sir, I'd rather face the storm than pretend it isn't raining." That night, Justin began constructing a detailed timeline. Date of the original citation, date of online payment, date of the town hall meeting, and the sudden reclassification of his case status days later. He also pulled transcripts from Pierce's past contempt cases, available through public records, and noticed a startling trend. The number of contempt charges had quadrupled since Pierce took the bench, and most of them were levied against people who had publicly criticized him. He called Mark again. "I need a list of names, anyone who's faced unusual legal pressure after clashing with Pierce." Mark didn't hesitate. Already on your inbox, the list was sobering. A mother who spoke against a zoning decision lost her custody hearing. Weeks later, under Pierce. A retired veteran who protested a construction permit was fined for municipal code violations. Nothing obvious, but enough to raise eyebrows when viewed together. Justin was now sure. This wasn't just about him. This was a pattern. He also knew he couldn't attack that pattern directly. Yet, he needed to focus on his case, one step at a time, and be strategic. The next morning, he requested a personal day from school, claiming he needed to meet with an attorney. In truth, he was the attorney. At the county law library, he spent hours combing through judicial conduct codes, procedural rules, and case law on recusal. An elderly librarian named Mrs. Finch helped him find a thick volume on contempt proceedings. "You're the teacher at Westridge, aren't you?" she asked, peering over her glasses. "Yes, ma'am," Justin replied. "I've been hearing things," she said gently. "If half of it's true, you've got guts. Just be careful. Judges don't like being embarrassed." Justin smiled faintly. "Neither do teachers." That afternoon at the Public Records Office, he requested all documentation related to the service of his supposed court notice. The clerk blinked in confusion. "That's specific," she said. "I'm being thorough," Justin replied. "Let's just say I have reason to believe this wasn't standard procedure." Back home, he began assembling everything into a trial binder. Every page tabbed and highlighted, every citation noted. He printed out municipal codes. He made 2 copies of every receipt. He even printed out screenshots of the payment portal, showing no requirement to appear in court after payment. But the most important thing he added, a sealed envelope, evidence so compelling it could destroy Judge Pierce's credibility if needed. But he would only use it as a last resort. As he zipped up his grandfather's briefcase, Justin paused for a moment, looking around his apartment. His world had become law books and legal pads once more. But this time, it wasn't about building a career. It was about defending what he believed in. And somewhere deep inside, he knew this fight wasn't just his. Into the lion's den, the municipal courthouse buzzed with its usual blend of chaos and tension. Nervous defendants paced the lobby. Attorneys in pressed suits whispered to clients. Clerks shuffled files from one desk to another. Amid the noise and movement, Justin Bieber stepped through the front doors, gripping his grandfather's leather briefcase. He wore a burgundy sweater, simple, respectful, unthreatening. His face was calm, his step steady, but inside, his heart pounded like a war drum. He'd spent the past 3 days living, breathing, and preparing for this moment. Every document was in order, every argument rehearsed. He wasn't here to win theatrically, he was here to win methodically. He took a seat in the back of the courtroom and observed. Judge Franklin Pierce presided like a king from his throne, dismissing arguments brusquely, rushing through cases with mechanical efficiency. He rarely looked up from the bench unless someone angered him. Justin noticed a pattern. Self-represented defendants were routinely interrupted, their objections ignored. The judge ran his courtroom like a machine built for speed, not justice. It was almost Justin's turn. He spotted Gerald, the clerk who had sent the revised summons. The man avoided eye contact, fidgeting as he called out names. When he finally reached docket number 47B, Bieber, Justin, the room seemed to still. Justin rose, walked with deliberate calm to the defendant's table, and placed his briefcase down. The weight of the courtroom settled over him like a heavy robe. Judge Pierce didn't look up. "Mr. Bieber," he began, his voice already condescending, "you are charged with failure to appear for a scheduled hearing and contempt of court. How do you plead?" "Not guilty, Your Honor," Justin replied, voice clear and steady. "I believe there's been a misunderstanding that I'd like to clarify." Pierce looked up for the first time, eyebrows raised slightly in mock surprise. "Oh, the facts seem quite clear. You were notified to appear. You didn't. This court issued a contempt citation. That's how the system works." "With respect, Your Honor," Justin said, "I never received any notice to appear. I received a traffic citation on October 1st. I paid it online on October 3rd. I have the confirmation receipt." He slid the printout across the table. Gerald hesitated before handing it to the judge. Pierce barely glanced at it. "Payment doesn't excuse a required appearance. The citation clearly indicates that you were to appear in court." Justin opened his briefcase, retrieving the original citation. "Actually, Your Honor, it does not. The citation makes no mention of a court appearance, and the payment portal indicated that once paid, the matter was resolved." The judge's lips tightened. "Mr. Bieber, perhaps in your literature classes you enjoy debating the meaning of words, but in my courtroom, I determine what constitutes notice and procedure." A few attorneys in the gallery exchanged looks. Justin remained composed. "I understand, Your Honor. However, due process requires that a defendant receive actual notice before being held in contempt. May I ask if the court can produce proof that such notice was delivered?" Pierce's eyes narrowed. "Mr. Gerald, provide the defendant with the service record." Gerald shuffled nervously, producing a form and handing it to Justin. He examined it. "This form is dated October 10th, Justin said, "but it's not signed by a process server, nor is there a certified mail receipt attached. There is, in fact, no evidence that this notice was ever delivered." A muscle twitched in Judge Pierce's jaw. "Are you suggesting court staff fabricated records?" "Not at all," Justin replied calmly. "I'm simply pointing out that the procedural requirements for contempt proceedings, specifically under Municipal Court Rule 7.3, have not been met. The courtroom grew noticeably still. Even the clerks had paused in their tasks. Pierce leaned forward, voice low and hard. "You're treading dangerously close to additional contempt, Mr. Bieber." "Understood, Your Honor," Justin said. "But I believe I'm entitled to question the legitimacy of the process used to bring me here." Pierce sat back. "This court finds you in contempt for failure to appear. You are fined $2,000 and sentenced to 40 hours of community service." He slammed his gavel down. Justin didn't flinch. "Your Honor," he said clearly, "I'd like to make a motion." "This matter is concluded," Pierce snapped. Justin didn't back down. "A motion for judicial recusal is always timely. Your Honor, I'm filing under Judicial Conduct Rule 2.11. That froze everything. Even Gerald looked up, wide-eyed. The gallery hushed. One young reporter in the back stopped taking notes and simply stared. Pierce blinked. "On what grounds?" Justin opened his briefcase again and withdrew a folder. "3, Your Honor." He stepped forward, his voice measured and confident. "First, there is an appearance of bias. You directly referenced my comments at a public town hall as part of your ruling, which suggests retaliation." Pierce's face flushed, but he said nothing. "Second, procedural irregularities. The citation was marked paid and resolved on October 3rd, but after the town hall, it was manually changed to appearance required, with no notice sent to me. I have a time-stamped system log and public records request to confirm this is the only citation with such a change in the past year." Gasps and murmurs filled the courtroom. "And third," Justin said, "I've identified 7 other cases in which individuals who publicly criticized Your Honor later faced contempt or procedural penalties. I've documented those instances, including court transcripts, which I am prepared to submit." Pierce slammed his gavel again. "Enough!" But Justin wasn't finished. "If Your Honor won't recuse yourself, I will be filing a formal complaint with the Judicial Conduct Committee. I also have testimony from other defendants and a sealed envelope with corroborating evidence. Evidence I hope won't be necessary, but have prepared nonetheless." Pierce's hands gripped the arms of his chair. "Mr. Bieber," he said through gritted teeth, "where did you acquire your legal training?" Justin allowed himself the smallest of smiles. "Before I became a teacher, Your Honor, I graduated top of my class from state law. I chose education, not because I couldn't practice law, but because I believed knowledge was the most powerful form of justice." The judge stared at him speechless. And for the first time that morning, Justin Bieber had the courtroom's complete attention, not as a defendant, but as a force to be reckoned with. The unmasking judge, Franklin Pierce, sat motionless, as if rooted to the bench by an unseen weight. The quiet teacher standing before him had just detonated a bomb in his courtroom, and everyone had heard the blast. Justin Bieber stood poised, his voice firm but respectful. "Your Honor, I move for your recusal based on Judicial Conduct Rule 2.11, which states that a judge shall disqualify himself when his impartiality might reasonably be questioned." The gallery was now completely silent. No rustling of papers, no murmurs. Even the bailiff stood perfectly still. It was as if the very air had been vacuumed out of the room. Pierce recovered just enough to speak. "Mr. Bieber, this is highly irregular. You are not an attorney." "With respect, Your Honor," Justin interrupted, "I am representing myself, which is allowed under state law, and my education does include a Juris Doctor degree. I chose not to take the bar, but I assure you, my understanding of due process is quite intact." The judge's face turned a shade darker. Justin continued, "This motion is based on 3 primary grounds. May I proceed?" Pierce said nothing. His silence was consent. "First," Justin said, opening his folder, "there's the clear appearance of bias. You linked my legal citation to my comments at a public forum. That is retaliation. I quote your exact words. Perhaps that's the real issue here. Your disrespect for the legal institution." That comment came after I referenced my town hall statement. That alone is grounds for recusal. He paused, letting it sink in. Second, procedural irregularities, he continued. After I paid my citation online, your court system changed the status to appearance required 6 days after the town hall meeting, where I criticized your ruling. A public records request confirms that mine is the only citation in the last 12 months where the status was changed post-payment. He held up a printed chart of all traffic citations in the same time frame. The clerk's system log shows this. Change was made manually. No email was sent. No certified mail delivered. No signed service form. There is, in short, no legal notification. And yet I was charged with failure to appear. Pierce's lips thinned to a tight line. He gripped his gavel but didn't raise it. Third, Justin said, a documented pattern. In the past 3 years, at least 7 individuals who have publicly challenged your rulings have faced contempt citations, unexpected code violations, or court penalties. I have documented each case, including court transcripts and supporting affidavits. He opened a second folder. These include a local journalist, a zoning activist, and a former councilwoman. None of them had issues with the law until they spoke against your decisions. Afterward, every one of them faced legal action under your bench. Pierce slammed his gavel, finally finding his voice. This is outrageous! You're smearing this court! Justin didn't flinch. This is not personal, Your Honor. This is procedural. And if you deny this motion, I'll file an immediate interlocutory appeal under the Collateral Order Doctrine, Hampton v. County Court, 2012, which, as you know, permits immediate review of a recusal denial when impartiality is in question. A reporter in the back had dropped his pen. One attorney whispered, "He's quoting case law." Justin finished. Also, in this sealed envelope, unless the motion is granted, I have a signed statement from a former court employee who observed unusual editing of case files tied to political figures. This individual is willing to testify under subpoena, but I would prefer not to expose them unless absolutely necessary. The courtroom was now electric. Pierce's hands were shaking. "What is it you want?" he asked at last, voice low, controlled. "Justice," Justin said, "and a court that respects the law as much as it expects citizens to." They stared at each other, teacher and judge, accuser and accused, truth versus power. Pierce finally spoke. 15-minute recess. He stood abruptly and vanished into his chambers, slamming the door behind him. The gallery exploded with whispered conversations. The clerk looked as if he might faint. Gerald slumped into his chair, rubbing his temples. In the back, the young reporter frantically typed notes, eyes wide. Justin sat calmly, slowly organizing his folders. He didn't gloat. He didn't smirk. He had simply done what needed to be done. Behind closed doors, Judge Pierce paced, his hands clenched, his jaw set. He had spent years crafting a reputation, controlling outcomes, making sure every move in his courtroom went as planned. But this teacher had just dismantled him, legally, publicly, and flawlessly. When he returned, his tone had changed. "In the interest of avoiding any appearance of impropriety," he said curtly, "the court hereby dismisses all charges against Mr. Bieber with prejudice. Additionally, I will recuse myself from any future proceedings involving the defendant or Westridge High School." He banged his gavel once and adjourned the session. Outside, cameras clicked as Justin stepped into the daylight. A reporter rushed forward. "Mr. Bieber, do you have a comment on what just happened?" Justin looked directly into the lens. "Our justice system only works when we understand our rights," he said. "Even judges must follow the law." And with that, he walked away, not victorious, but vindicated. Echoes of justice. The fallout was immediate. By the time Justin arrived home that evening, his phone was buzzing with notifications. The local news had picked up the story within hours. A viral headline read, "High school teacher outsmarts judge in dramatic courtroom battle." Social media exploded. Comments flooded in. "This guy's a hero. Finally, someone standing up to corruption. Who knew a literature teacher could drop legal bombs like that? But Justin wasn't celebrating. He sat on his couch, surrounded by empty folders, drained from the emotional and mental weight of the day. He didn't seek revenge. He never wanted fame. All he wanted was fairness and the ability to do his job without fear of retaliation. His phone rang again. It was Mark Chen. "You shook the system, Mr. Bieber," Mark said, voice breathless with excitement. "I've got city council members calling me, asking for copies of those cases you referenced. This could be bigger than just one courtroom. This could be a county-wide audit." Justin didn't respond at first. Then quietly, he said, "Just make sure the real story gets told." "You have my word." The next morning, Justin returned to Westridge High. He expected whispers, side glances, maybe even tension. Instead, the entire front office paused as he walked by. One of the receptionists gave him a small nod. Another smiled faintly. They had all seen the news. He walked into his classroom and found a small stack of notes from students, handwritten messages that said things like, "Thanks for teaching us to stand up for what's right," and "You're the reason I want to study law now." It wasn't loud praise. It wasn't applause. It was quiet, handwritten truth. Later that afternoon, Principal Stevens and Superintendent Davis stepped into Justin's classroom just as the final bell rang. The students filtered out slowly, clearly curious about what was about to happen. Stevens closed the door behind them. His posture was different, less guarded, more human. "I owe you an apology," he said softly. "I should have supported you." Justin looked up. "You were in a tough spot." "No," Davis interrupted, stepping forward. "We were cowards. We let politics cloud what should have been a clear issue. You spoke the truth, and you were punished for it." Stevens cleared his throat. "Judge Pierce has taken an indefinite leave of absence. There's a state investigation underway," Davis added, "and the educational funding that was diverted, it's being restored, in full." Justin exhaled slowly, as if finally releasing something he'd been holding for days. As the two men turned to leave, Stevens paused. "For what it's worth," he said, "I watched the footage from court. You were brilliant." That night, Justin sat alone in his apartment, a cup of tea in hand, staring at an old photograph of his grandfather, the small-town attorney who believed in law as a shield, not a sword. Beside the photo was a new frame, recently left on his desk by a group of students. Inside it, a printed quote from To Kill a Mockingbird and a note that read, "Thank you for teaching us that words and truth still matter." He smiled, fingers tracing the frame. This was never about beating a judge. It was about proving that no one, no matter how powerful, is above the rules we all must live by. That courage doesn't come from shouting the loudest, but from standing firm when everyone else steps back. The quiet ones, after all, often carry the sharpest truths. The quiet revolution. Some battles aren't fought with fists. They're fought with preparation, clarity, and an unwavering belief in what's right, even when the odds seem impossible. Justin Bieber never wanted to be a hero. He didn't march into that courtroom expecting to dismantle a system. He simply refused to be silenced by power dressed in a robe, and because of that, the very institution that tried to crush him ended up exposed for what it truly was, fragile beneath the weight of truth. His story reminds us that knowledge is never wasted. Years spent studying dusty casebooks, years most people assumed were forgotten, came flooding back at the exact moment he needed them. He didn't need a license to practice justice. He needed the courage to use what he knew, and the patience to wait for the perfect moment to strike. When he stood before Judge Pierce and calmly dismantled years of unchecked abuse, it wasn't loud, it wasn't violent, it was surgical. That's what made it so powerful. In a world where people in authority often go unchallenged, Justin's story is more than a courtroom drama. It's a blueprint for quiet resistance, a reminder that standing up doesn't always mean shouting. Sometimes it means showing up, calm, prepared, unafraid, And for every student who watched him walk through the fire and return stronger, he became more than a teacher. He became proof that justice still has a voice, and sometimes it speaks, in whispers. Expert perspective. Legal analysts reviewing the case later remarked that Justin's motion for recusal and his procedural citations were as precise as any seasoned litigator. One called it a masterclass in civil resistance inside a courtroom. But perhaps the most damning verdict came not from the court, but from the public. Within days, the Judicial Oversight Board opened an inquiry into Pierce's case history. Whispers turned into headlines, and behind those headlines, more people began to come forward. And now, we ask you, have you ever been silenced by someone in power? Have you ever wondered if one voice, even a quiet one, can make a difference? Share your story in the comments, because the more we speak up, the less power bullies have. Drop a comment below if you've ever faced injustice. Like if you believe in standing for what's right. Share this story with someone who needs courage today. And don't forget to subscribe, because Justin's story isn't over yet. In the next episode, a janitor with a secret notebook uncovers a multi-million-dollar embezzlement at the heart of the same school district. And once again, justice won't come from the top. It'll rise from the shadows. Until then, remember, true power doesn't always wear a suit. Sometimes it carries chalk and lesson plans. And sometimes it knows the law better than the lawmakers themselves.